Fort Kent Historical Society Museum Complex located in Fort Kent, Maine. The complex has 5 buildings, the first of which is the Bangor and Aroostook train station, built in 1902. The second is one of the oldest houses in Fort Kent. The Diggle Doobie House was built in 1839. The third is the Doobie Barn, which had been built in 1860. The complex also includes a replica, built in 2010, of the Washington School. The last building is the former Bangor and Aroostook freight shed. But today, we are inside the former Bangor and Aroostook train station, where Chad Pelletier, curator of the museum, will tell us about a new display of paintings by Fort Kent artists or of Fort Kent scenes.
This is the first in our exhibit here. This painting was done by Alfie Nadeau, who owned the Nadeau's House of Furniture and the Nadeau's Funeral Home. And he took up painting in his retirement. He retired in the early 1960s, and he was quite a prolific painter. He painted mostly landscape scenes, but he did attempt portraits and copies of famous paintings, and this is the only one we have of his so far. We'd like to get more, however, but this was Jesus with children of different nationalities, I would call that painting. It's not too bad. It's really good. That painting belonged to Theresa Doobie, whose father Felix was a first cousin to Alfie Nadeau, and Theresa had it in her home until she passed away, and the family gave it to me personally, and I've donated it back to the art collection right here at the Fort Kent Historical Society. Okay, this painting is by Claudette Nadeau Plourde, Joella Plourde's wife, who worked for many years at Escovitz. Claudette had taken art classes with Claude Picard at JFK College, which was run under Claude Charette. That was right here on Main Street in the mid to late 60s, early 70s, I believe, the JFK College function. This painting was created in 1969 for the Fort Kent Centennial celebration. They had an art exhibit at the JFK College, specifically for the Centennial. And this portrait is of quite a famous Fort Kent person. His name was William Henry Cunliffe. And Mr. Cunliffe, of course, owned Cunliffe Depot and many significant buildings here in Fort Kent. And this is a copy of a photograph. I know the exact photograph that she had used for the portrait. William Henry Cunliffe was second generation. He had come here probably in the late 1890s and had quite a significant lumber business here in the Allagash region and here. He also married Major Dickey's youngest daughter, Cora. So he, and there's a companion photo of Cora that I've seen also. But Mrs. Plourde created this again in 1969 for the Fort Kent Centennial celebration, and it's quite a nice piece to our collection, and that is also the only one we have of Claudette's. But I spoke to her yesterday, and she said that she'll see what she can do to bring some more here. She specialized mostly in still lifes and some portraits, very few portraits, but mostly still lifes, and she did that as a relaxation and for a very nice hobby, very good hobby. These next two paintings, Don, were created by Joella, Voisine, Bouchard, Paradis, who also took up painting as a hobby in the late 1960s. And she was quite prolific herself. She painted many different landscapes and scenes, and particularly the one on the bottom is of a stream that was painted in 1968. And the one on the top, was painted in 1971, and it's a Jack Holton's potato house that was in Wallagrass. So, and we really enjoy here for paintings of Fort Kent people and Fort Kent places we can identify. So that's a really, really nice piece. Both of them are really nice pieces to our collection. We actually have 3 of Mrs. Paradis' paintings that she herself donated to us after a request was made by me. And she's got a really, really nice painting at our rectory here of the original St. Louis church that burnt in 1907. And ironically, Mrs. Paradis gave it to the parish, but it was also created for the 1969 Centennial Art Exhibit that was done through Claude Picard and Claude Charette. So Mrs. Paradis is a very, very good artist. I appreciate her work. I wish she would have done more. Our next painting, we don't know a heck of a lot about it. We do know it was painted in 1966 by a lady by the name of Lucille Forbes Clayton. I can't find too much on her. I found her husband's obituary online, and she had predeceased him by many years, apparently. I purchased this painting at a garage sale from the people who lived just about where that painting was painted. So I have to get back to them and ask them the history of it and who the woman was. She apparently wasn't from Maine, so I don't know what her connection was to Fort Kent, but I like the style a lot. It's impressionist style. It's definitely, it's Fort Kent, and it's the St. John River. You can see the bridge in the background, the church in Clare. And that's possibly part of the cemetery, the lower cemetery. So I really have no idea on that one. It's just one of the best $2 I've ever spent. It's made on beaver board. It's just a piece of junk wood that she took and painted, and it's really, really nice. It looks great from far. Being impressionist style, it looks much better from far, so that's why we placed it on top. But not a heck of a lot of information on this lady. We don't even know her Fort Kent connections, but hopefully we'll find out soon. Well, this next one, Don, is another garage sale find. This one I think was a little bit more pricey. It was probably $4 or $5. But this one was created by Theresa Clavette, who, from what I understand, I'll have to look up her biography. She was from Sinclair, and she was a member of the Order of the Little Franciscans of Mary, who taught school here in Fort Kent and also were the hospital sisters here at Northern Maine Medical Center, or People's Benevolent Hospital at the time. And from what I understand, Theresa worked in the lab. She was the head of the lab at one time, the lab department, in the late 60s and early 70s. Theresa also took lessons from Claude Picard and at JFK College. So this was painted about 1972, and it's behind the hospital. The sisters used to have camps back there that they used to go visit and stay for a couple days or whatever. It was just a place of relaxation. And apparently one fall, the fall of 72, Theresa brought this canvas and she created this painting. Again, because she was taking classes, it was part of her. And the original price, apparently it had been put up for sale, and the original price is still written behind of $75. So I got a really, really good deal, and I think it's a really nice fit here for us, especially of the river and especially of the fall. It's one of the only ones we have of autumn, so it's really, really, I like it a lot. These next two paintings were done by perhaps one of my favorite Fort Kent portrait artists. His name was Edwin Corriveau, and he took up painting also as a hobby. He primarily did still lifes and some landscapes, not a whole heck of a lot, but he was really good at portrait painting, a lot better than the average amateur painter, I guess. And what we like especially of his work is he included the portrait and then the building that was associated with that person. So when you look at that, even though the Escovet's garage isn't there, immediately that's Harry Escovet's, and so the garage kind of reinforces what what the theme of the painting is. So he did, and Mr. Corriveau worked for many, many years at Escovitz Motors for Harry Escovitz until he retired, actually, in the late 1980s. And unfortunately, Harry didn't like the image at all, so that's why we ended up with it. He didn't like it, which perhaps I think it was true to life, and you know, most people don't like their portrait painted. I know I hate my picture taken, so he didn't like it, so that's why we ended up with it. And but he was really good, Edwin. I have to admit, I've appreciated his art more and more as I look at it. And we have a couple good photos of him actually painting, not this portrait, but another one. And we have 4 of Edwin Corriveau's paintings here, and they're all historical in nature. So we have this one of the Escovitz, and we have a painting of Harry and Marilyn's home, which was Jake Escovett's former home. And then we also have a really good portrait, a painting of the Fort Kent High School, which we plan on installing in our schoolhouse, which is going to be a museum to education in the Fort Kent area. So Edwin Corriveau is very well represented. And also recently, Mrs. Corriveau, who's still with us, she's a very young woman, she promised us that she has the drawings that Edwin had done previous to the painting, so the studies, I guess, for the painting. So she's going to be passing them along to us to add along with the painting. And this is another one of Edwin Corriveau's paintings, and one of our favorites. It's of Mary Nowlin, who was the second principal of Madawaska Training School from 1897 to 1926. And she's featured, behind her is featured the Madawaska Training School buildings at the time. So we see on the left is Nowlin Hall, which was named after Mary Nowlin, who was from Ashland. And then on the right is Sear Hall, which was named after Vital Sear, the first principal of the Madawaska Training School. It's quite a very good portrait. I think Edwin didn't include her mustache though, but she had quite a distinctive mustache. And normally she didn't wear glasses, she wore a monocle. So, but that was the only, it's a really good rendering of her, and we like the Madawaska Training School theme. The Nowlin Hall buildings Nowlin Hall burnt down in 1955, and then the Sear Hall was torn down in 1963 when they built the new Sear Hall. So, and now Mary Nowlin's name is immortalized at the University of Maine at Fort Kent through their dining hall. So she left Fort Kent in 1926 and then passed away in Ashland, and I believe it's in 1933, not very long. But she was with Madawaska Training School nearly from the beginning with Vital Sear. The school was founded in 1878, and she joined in the early 1880s, and at the time, of course, Madawaska Training School was valley-wide, so they would meet 1 year in Fort Kent and then the other year in Grand Isle, and she did that back and forth. I know a lady that Mary Nowlin used to board with her grandparents, and she remembered stories her grandmother told her of a young Mary Nowlin, so that's a really nice piece to add to our collection, and we've had it for about 15 years now. Mr. Corriveau was still alive when he had both personally donated all 4 paintings to us. These next 2 paintings are by Fort Kent artist George Roy, who lived on Main Street. George primarily was a machinist, and he worked with electrical motors, quite a very interesting gentleman. I was not always an appreciator of George Roy's art because he was not a realist painter. He didn't paint portraits to make them look like photographs, and so that at first I was never really attracted to his work until I learned different techniques of painting and how people interpreted art. So the top one there, this one here is by George. It was done in 1978, and it's called The Sermon on the Mount. And of course, the Sermon on the Mount is primarily the biggest, where we have Jesus' teachings, the Christian teachings of the church came out or was proclaimed through the Sermon on the Mount. Now, this painting is nearly an exact copy of an original that was done by a Swedish artist by the name of Carl Block. And what's interesting is George pretty much made the painting exactly the way it was, but he also added family members in the background. So, man, we can pick them out. We can pick out George Roy Jr. and James and members of the Roy family that were included in the portrait. So Mr. Roy really had an impressionist style. He really tried different things, which I didn't appreciate at first, like I said, but now I'm getting to learn art a little bit better, and I understand why he tried those things. He was more of an art historian in comparison to his father and his daughter, who are more realist paintings. They paint paintings to look real, look like photographs. So he really experimented with a lot of different things and a lot of color and different styles of painting. So I'm appreciating him more and more and more all the time. This painting was donated to us a couple of years ago by Linda Roy, who was George Roy Jr.'s widow. And she donated that with many, many, many other paintings to our collection from the Roys, and they were very pleased to give them to us. I'm very pleased to know that they are on display here in Fort Kent instead of, on a wall in Scarborough or Portland. So she was very appreciative that we wanted them. She was very, very pleased, and very pleased to know that people would be viewing them. This next painting here is also by Mr. Roy. Very interesting painting with quite a nice story to it, a very patriotic story. This painting was painted in August of 1972. It is Memorial Day of 1972. And the gentleman in the middle here, this is George Roy Jr., and this is George Roy the artist. So we have a painting, a self-portrait in the painting of the artist himself. This painting was donated last year to us by the Fort Kent VFW, and Mr. Roy, George Roy the painter, had donated it directly to them in the 1970s. George Roy Jr. had just returned from Vietnam, and as many know, he had been wounded in Vietnam and had lost his leg while he was there. He severely wounded, nearly died. And he returned to the States and was fitted with a prosthesis, and he arrived in Fort Kent just a few days before the Memorial Day parade. His father, George Roy Sr., who was the commander and also the parade marshal that day, he offered to get his son a car to ride in, seeing that the prosthesis was new and George Jr. was still getting used to it. And George Jr. refused the car. He said, "No, I will be marching like everyone else." And his widow has since told me that it was pretty rough after. His prosthesis hurt him a lot after, and it was quite a sacrifice for him to do that. And although he was very proud to do that, and that was the most important thing on that day. So what's interesting too is that this is an impressionist style painting. It's called pointillism. It's literally little dots of paint. The frame of the photo of the painting had been done, and then all the fill-ins is little dots of paint, which is an impressionist style that was developed by George Seurat. And some of his paintings are famous just for that pointillism style. And what's nice, Mr. Roy mentioned who all the people were in the parade, and we have Willis Stoddy here from Soldier Pond. This, of course, is George Roy Jr. This is Ronaldo Levac from Pleasant Street. This is Roland Bard Sr., also from Pleasant Street. This gentleman here is Leopold Audebert, who lived on the Frenchville Road. And then the guy to his right carrying the rifle is Fern Thibodeau. And since this painting was painted nearly 50 years ago, there's only Mr. Levac still with us and Fern Thibodeau. And I really like how Mr. Roy even smudged some of the paint, especially under their feet, to denote motion. So it's a very, very interesting photo and painting, and especially since we now know the story behind it. It's very touching and very nice to realize that we've had very patriotic and very committed people to our country. So I enjoy that painting very much. I could stare at it for hours.
Now in the background, is this Going down Pleasant Street,
going down Main Street. So you have, this home is next to Gas and Go. I believe it was at Joella's house. This here is the VFW. So, and this would have been the Valin Boucher building, that was torn down from McDonald's in the early 90s. Okay, this next portrait is of the Blockhouse, of course, and we have our next 4 or 5 paintings are of the Blockhouse. This one was done very amateur style by Theresa Bouchard Young, who many of you remember as a school teacher here at SAD 27, and I'm not sure when she painted it, perhaps the mid to late 1970s. I remember her, she wasn't there when I went to school. She had retired the year before. Apparently she knew our class was coming, so she retired really quick. But I remember her as a really artistic type. She would do many different art projects with the children, and she did some pretty neat things. But that also was a garage sale purchase, possibly after she had sold her home. And so we got it. And one of my favorite things is I like the red in it, which had to have been a canoe. So she probably did that from a photograph. Our next 2 paintings are by Fort Kent artist Dolores Dumont, and they both feature the Blockhouse. The first painting here on the top was done by Dolores in 2007, and it was in response that I had seen the original painting at an art show. Didn't have the money to purchase it, and I unfortunately had to let it go. So I talked to her after, and she had sold the painting, unfortunately. So I was surprised. Probably about a year later, she made another copy for me personally and gave it to me. So that's one of my favorite Blockhouse paintings. I just really like the style of it. I like the 3D effect, I guess, with the trees, and then the Blockhouse being in an inset like that. And I just love the color blue. So, but that's one of my favorites of hers. This is another scene by Dolores Dumont that one of my former employers, Cecile Voisine, gave me as a gift. And it's also a winter scene. I like it a whole heck of a lot. And it's probably done in the mid-1980s because we can still see the stockade fence behind the Blockhouse. Real nice painting.
Now, is Dolores Dumont still around?
Yes, she is, and she's still painting, and she still goes to art shows, and she does, I've noticed a lot of, because paintings, people have a hard time to understand how art is priced, they think, they look at a painting and they say, $300, why, but, there's a lot of work, and there's a lot of thought involved in a painting, because I remember working with Sue Roy and asking her for a painting, and it literally the process was almost a year from thinking and exactly how you're going to execute it and what you're going to paint first and how you're going to put everything. So there's a lot of thought that goes involved in painting, and people just don't realize why art is priced the way it is. Actually art is priced, Dolores, poor woman, she probably makes 10 cents an hour in comparison to what, so, and I think she just sells her paintings mostly, in my opinion, probably to buy art supplies more than anything else. So unless they become famous, they'll never become, rich off of painting. It probably has provided her with a little bit extra money, but not a whole heck of a lot for the time involved. So primarily she's painted as a hobby. She's gone into the professional leagues, I would say, but she'll never be a rich woman from painting because of the time and the effort involved in painting. I know she does a lot of reproductions of photographs, or she'll do her own spin on a reproduction of a photograph, but still that does take a lot of time and blocking it out and thinking what are you going to paint first. And oils are a little bit easier. Watercolors are horrible to do that because you actually have to paint everything in steps. So, but I I really love her work, and I've noticed a predominance of her work is no longer still lifes, it's local scenes and landscapes of Fort Kent and winter scenes. We got a great one where I work that she did. It's a huge one of a sugar cane, and it's really, really well done, and it's done, I would say 1960s style, where the paint was awful thick. It's almost like Vincent Van Gogh style. They're a really thick paint, and the paint in turn denotes texture. And so she does also try a lot of different things. Not as much as George Roy did, but she does try, and she experiments a lot with color. It's different. Okay. This painting here, Don, is perhaps, it's the oldest painting in our collection. It was painted in 1896 by Mary Fenlason, who Mary Fenlason was Major Dickey's granddaughter, and Major Dickey was the gentleman who brought the university or the Madawaska Training School to the Fort Kent area and brought many, many things. He was a legislator for nearly 40 years. He was kind of like the John Martin of our day, I guess. He was there a long time and did a lot of great things for us up here. So this painting was painted again in 1896 for Mary, by a 10-year-old Mary Fenlason. She painted it on linen, which is really unusual, and she painted it for her school teacher, who was a Madawaska Training School student and was teaching in the model school. And the school teacher's name was Jenny Pratt, P-R-A-T-T. And this painting was donated about 20 years ago to us by Miss Pratt's great niece. She was a lady from Bangor. And she came up one day and brought us quite a few artifacts from the Fort Kent area and gave us that painting. And it was just recently, because it was marked who the artist was, just recently we realized who that young lady was. And ironically, we also had a photograph of the young lady in our collections of, that's a 10-year-old Mary Fenlason.
That's Mary Fenlason at 10 years old.
At 10 years old, about the same time that she painted that painting. Now, Mary Fenlason later married into the Allen family. Her husband's name was Richard Allen, and they owned the largest hotel in the state of Maine, the Bangor House, which is still there. Still there, and I believe there's apartment buildings now, or condos, but she moved away and died. I believe she died in the 1970s, quite an older lady, but she was Major Dickey's granddaughter. She was the only granddaughter, actually. She had a sister who died very young, but she was Mary, and her father was, hold on the name, her father's name was Amaziah Greenleaf Fenlason, and he was our town's attorney. And her mother, Mrs. Fenlason, I was trying to think of her first name. Mrs. Fenlason was Fort Kent's first town historian. So they were very interesting people, and they lived on Pleasant Street, where Phil Thibodeau used to live. This is the last of our Blockhouse paintings, and this is a kind of a mixed media. This is by not a Fort Kent artist, but a local artist. He was from Saint François, New Brunswick. His name was Henri Nadeau, and most people know of him of his nature scenes and winter scenes, and these were produced in the late 1960s, and at the time, Mr. Nadeau was still hand carving each and every carving. So the front part is of a carving, and then the background and the foreground were all painted by Mr. Nadeau. He created perhaps hundreds of these plaques here, and it seems they were mostly purchased either by civic groups in town or the town of Fort Kent itself. And when dignitaries would come to town, the town or either the Rotary Club or whatever would present these portraits to those people. I found this portrait on eBay, ironically, about 10 years ago, and it was only $10, which in its time in the late 60s, they were probably close to $60, $70. They were very expensive, and many collectors out there who are looking for his work. And we've collected primarily just Fort Kent Blockhouse ones. We have many different sizes. And we really like this one a lot. This one was given out in 1969 by the Fort Kent Rotary Club. So
now the blockhouse, is actually carved. It's not.
Yes, the blockhouse
wood
and the foreground. So you have here,
the bottom of that,
and then this, the building itself.
Yeah.
In the mid 1970s, Mr. Nadeau, what he would do is he would carve one and then make resin copies. So, and then he in turn would, but the originals probably from the mid to late 60s to early 70s were hand carved wood. This next painting is by Fort Kent artist LuLu Pelletier, and LuLu still has a studio here in town. Is probably our only artist in town that has a studio, and she painted this probably about 6 or 7 years ago for Louis and Kathy Pelletier's book A is for Allagash. This is D for Drive. And although it wasn't used in the book, they decided to go with another painting. LuLu gave us a really nice discount on it, and we were able to purchase it and add it to our collection. And it was one of the first and only, perhaps, ones that we've actually purchased with our own funds, and I like it a lot. And it's really great for our area because a lot of people participated in the drives and remember the drives, and so we'd like to add many more of Lulu's paintings to our collection, and hopefully in the near future we definitely will.
Now, what were the log drives?
Well, log drives were throughout the winter. The gentlemen and ladies would pile the logs at a landing on mostly the Allagash River or even the Upper St. John River, and in order to get their logs to the mills and to markets, they didn't have skidders, and they didn't have fellow bunchers, and they didn't have trucks to bring their products out, so they used the river in the spring. So the river would bring the logs down to either Van Buren to be milled, or they would bring them to Fredericton or St. John, New Brunswick to be milled or sold directly as is.
So I'm assuming that the drives are not ongoing.
No, I believe the last drive was for Irving, and it was in the early 60s. 63 pops into my head. It's either 63 or 64 was the last log drive. Unfortunately, log drives, while they were very good for our economy, it was not very good for the river itself. The St. John River at one time was a very deep river, but it was also very narrow. And because they needed to get the logs through, and consequently, there were rocks and there were rapids, and so they really changed the footprint of the river in order to make the log drives easier. So essentially what they did is, and that's perhaps why we have flooding issues today. Not only did they cut all the trees down, the root base are gone to hold the water, but also the river has become just a giant sluice. So you have a lot of water at one section, and it just flows right through quickly. Whereas years ago there were different eddies, and there were different barriers that would make the water come down much slower. I worked for a gentleman in Allagash that he took care of the log drive. He was foreman, I guess, at the Big Rapids section. And he told me that Irving would send up hundreds of boxes of dynamite, and they told them, make sure you use it all. So, and they would just literally blast as many rocks as they could get out of the rapids area in order to make the log drives that much easier. But unfortunately, it helped the economy, and it fed a lot of children, but unfortunately it damaged the river significantly. And then consequently, we started seeing flooding as early. The first flood we had here in Fort Kent with significant damage was in 1923. It didn't always flood. It just started in the mid-1920s, and then progressively, the year after year, like 1923 was a bad one, 1929 was a bad one, 33 was perhaps the first catastrophic flood, where I would call it perhaps $1 million flood. And then 39 was bad. And subsequently, then it happened year after year after year. So, yeah, unfortunately, the log drives did spoil the nature a little bit, or spoil the river. And now, consequently, instead of a very deep, narrow river, we have a very wide, shallow river. These next two paintings, Don, we're going to be titling them, having the label for these two paintings. We're going to be calling them the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. And these were by Fort Kent artist Gilbert O'Roy, perhaps our earliest known artist that lived in our area. Mr. Roy was born in 1877 in Saint Benoit, Quebec. He immigrated as a young man to the Fort Kent area. I believe he was 27 years old. He was primarily a commercial painter and a decorator, but he did paint in his spare time, and he also painted murals in homes. He did a whole lot of work, mostly commercial work though. But this first painting here is, he entitled it Saint Joseph et l'Enfant Jésus, and it was painted in 1891 when he was 14 years old. So that's the first one that we have. And then this next painting here, we'd call it the Omega, the last painting. It's thought to be the last painting that Mr. Roy painted in 1946. He died in 1947 of cancer in February of 1947. So it's thought to be his last work, and you can tell how much he's progressed from 14 years old to nearly 70 years old. He was 69 years old. Now, this one is called La Mort de Saint Joseph. And ironically, again, his first painting was of St. Joseph as a young man, and now this is the death of St. Joseph. And there were thousands of paintings in between these two. Very dark painting. Gilbert turned to religious art toward the end of his life. He also painted nature scenes. He painted portraits. He did the commercial work, and he also painted nudes, which some people were aware of. We did an exhibit of his work 2 years ago for the World Acadian Congress. The Fort Kent Historical Society, we own about 50 of his paintings. We're very, very lucky, and there's many, 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 many more in the community. In the most obscure places too. You never know where you'd find one. There's a really nice religious painting he did of St. Louis in St. Louis Church here in Frenchville. He also did murals in Frenchville. He did some in Plourde. He did some in St. John. Here in Fort Kent, he did murals in his house, which was of the Four Seasons, which we have them. We plan on using them eventually in our boardroom. But we thought it'd be really great because he was such a prolific artist, and we realized that we had the first painting he ever did and the last painting he ever did in our collection. So I thought we'd put them together and call them the Alpha and the Omega, which was a quote from Jesus himself, I am the Alpha and the Omega. So both of these paintings were given to us 3 years ago now by Linda Roy and family, who George Roy Jr. was the grandson of the painter. Recently, I posted La Mort de Saint Joseph, which is one of my favorite paintings of his. I really like how there's textures on the blanket and on the Virgin Mary's robe, and you can see texture there. So his work has improved tenfold in comparison to when he was 14 years old. So I posted it, and Mary Roy, who is also Gilbert Roy's granddaughter, she lives in Honolulu, Hawaii. She worked at the public library there for many, many years, has just recently retired, and she wrote that was one of her favorites. And so I wrote back to her and I said, oh, I agree, I can stare at it for hours. And she said that painting was hanging over the stairway at the Roy house here in town, and she said their quote was, "It was our constant companion." So I like that a lot. I like that look. So we're going to be adding that to the bottom. It's our constant companion. So we thought it was interesting after we realized that Mary remembered, and Sue and the other members of the Roy family remembered where all these paintings were in the house. the BBC recently did a show on I'm trying to think of remember the name of the place in England, but on a huge manor house in England that belonged to Sir Walpole, who was the first Prime Minister of Great Britain. He had a huge art collection, and they were able to, they had maps of where each and every painting was in the house. In about 50 years after the Prime Minister Walpole passed away, his grandson sold the paintings to Catherine the Great of Russia. So now most of the paintings were in Russia at the Hermitage, at the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg. So Great Britain and Russia got together and they sent the paintings back to the Prime Minister's place, and they placed them back in the exact same locations where they were. So I thought that was really neat that we could do something similar to Gilbert Roy, is noting where they were in the house. So, and this one again was hanging above the stairway, and Mary mentioned that they would see it every day, and they enjoyed it every day. And she unfortunately was born after her grandfather passed away, so she never knew it. There was only one grandchild that ever knew him. And her remembrance of him is when he was very sick, he was very ill. But we love these two. They're some of our favorites. So please come down and see us and see some more of our art.
Now, Chad, thank you for the description of all of these photographs, especially of Fort Kent artists and Fort Kent scene. These are right now, they're located here in the railroad station. Tell me, what are your plans for this particular exhibit? We've done it primarily to show highlights of our collection, because we realized that we started to have quite a large collection, and we wanted to display them. And this primarily, on this area in the train station, we had a lot of photographs, and we realized a lot of the photographs were original, and it wasn't safe to keep them, or a good idea to preserve them on the wall like that. So we removed them and placed them in albums where they keep out of natural light. And so this is a take actually on, there's a similar railroad station in the Rivière Bleue, Quebec, called La Gare, and they use it as a contemporary art gallery. So local people who want to sell their wares and paintings, they bring them there. So I thought, geez, I like that idea, and especially the waiting room. This is the ladies' waiting room out of the Bangor and Aroostook train station. I thought it was a great idea to kind of bring highlights of our art collection and perhaps entice people to donate more, or donate money that we can purchase more of them to add to our collection. Because in our new building that we've since purchased 2 years ago, in the Jim Robinson building, we plan on having a permanent art gallery that we're going to be just switching out the different artists or different themes. So yeah, that's primarily it. We'd like to entice people to donate more, and just hoping that we'll have just a different exhibit for people to see, something different, something new, and fresh. Well, Chad, thank you.
Thank you
very much. This is great, and we do hope that people come over and see this. I mean, and also see the whole train station and the building next door.
Yeah. We have 5 buildings. 5 buildings here at the site. We have, I'll list them in order. We have the Bangor Aroostook train station, which was built in 1902, and the Fort Kent Historical Society acquired in 1980. We have the historic Doobie House, one of the oldest houses in Fort Kent, which was built in 1839. We have the Doobie Barn, which was a reconstruction of a barn that was made in 1860. We have the Washington School replica, which was built in 2010. And then we also have the former Bangor and Aroostook freight shed, which is going to be dedicated next week, next Saturday, July 16th. And we're going to be dedicating it to our founder and first president, Paul D. Thibodeau. So it's going to be a general museum. So whatever artifacts do not fit in the train station, schoolhouse, barn, or house will be going in there. So we're going to have our library, our archives, our photograph collection, our scrapbook collection is all going to be at the new building. So it's going to be the Paul D. Thibodeau Visitor Center. Very well.
Well, thank you again.
Thank you, Don.
The pleasure is mine, and hopefully the people will come over and enjoy this as much as I have.
Yes, I hope they come too. And we have 2 great, capable tour guides
that'll be able to give you first-class tours of our site.
Perfect. Thank you.